pretty sure we're going to need to turn the lights off to be able to see that well enough. And in the back, we can turn that light on back there. And let's open the blinds just a little bit to give us some view for those that are looking on their notes. Yeah, that's better. Sweet. Okay. So chapter 4 is going to deal with supply and prices. We talked about demand and prices in chapter 3. And so this is the opposite side of things. And hopefully you'll be able to see that as we graph and as we go through some illustrative points on that too. Now, I'm going to begin here talking about what supply is all about. Supply defined is simply the amount of goods and services that businesses are willing and able, there are those terms again, willing and able, to provide or produce at different prices. So what are the two key elements here of supply? They have to be able to do what? Be willing and able. Okay, so again, supply works the same way as demand in this regard, that you have to have a business or a supplier who is both willing and able to supply at various prices. You can't just make the assumption that, well, because you want to produce 500,000 donuts in the next 30 minutes, does not mean that you are able to do so. It could also mean that demand is really, really high for your donuts right now. And you have a whole line of people out the door, but you're just tired and you're not willing to do it. You have the ability to make more donuts, but you're like, no, you know what? I'm just closing up. I'm going home. Does homework work this way? Yeah. Think about your weekend. You may have had the ability to work on your project this last weekend, but you were not willing. And so you decided, I got another week to do it. No big deal. I'll just put it off. Some of you did work on your project, so I'm not trying to put you down if you did work on it, because I know some of you were putting in effort. Some of you have already turned it in. Awesome. But there is that willingness there that's a key component of supply, and it's also a key component of demand. They have to be willing and able to provide at different prices, and both of those are really critical. Now, we talk about the law of supply. The law of supply says that the higher the price buyers are willing to pay, the greater the quantity that firm will produce. So the higher the price that buyers are willing to pay, the greater the quantity suppliers will produce. It works the opposite way as well. So the lower the price that buyers are willing to pay for an item, the less you're willing to produce. So from an owner's perspective, if you have a particular item that you are trying to sell, what's the question that you should be asking here? Asking yourself or looking at your business? What's the highest price they're going to pay, and what's the lowest price that you're willing to take? Okay, considering all the effort, the materials, the time that is put into making whatever product it is that you're selling, you've got to take those two things into consideration, because on your mind you're thinking, I want the most money I can possibly get out of my donut that I made today. But yet, if I overprice it and nobody's willing to buy it, then is it doing me any good just sitting on my shelf? Absolutely not. It's not doing you any good unless you can find a buyer for that. And so you want to find somebody who is willing to pay a price for that, and that means you may have to compromise a little bit. So you got to ask yourself that question, well, how low am I willing to go and still be content, be happy with that? So we're going to bring up supply schedules, supply graphs here. These work the same way as demand. We simply are going to plot them together. Supply schedule, there's really nothing different that you need to know about supply schedule other than the fact that it tells you how much the firm is willing to produce at the given prices. And it's very specific. So it'll tell you at $1 how much they're willing to produce, at $4 how much they're willing to produce, and so on. Now, the supply curve looks different than the demand curve. In what way? Which direction does this one move? moves up and to the right. So that's something that you should be including here in your supply curve, be able to differentiate between the two. Demand always moves which direction? Down and to the right. Supply curve moves up and to the right. We always start moving from left to right when we're looking at these graphs, when we're talking about them. So this one is going to move up and to the right, this direction. Our demand curve would move down and to the right this way, and we're going to merge them here shortly. So supply curve, we're going to plot the points that we get from our supply schedule. Or when we're showing whether they shift and move, we're showing that they move to the right or to the left, like we did with our demand curves last week. Now, here is that dreaded quantity issue once again. So when we see that we move along the same curve on the supply schedule, it's the same thing as what we saw in demand. When there is a price increase and no other factors involved, we just see that price goes up, then according to the law of supply, price goes up. What are you willing to supply, more or less? Price goes up, you're willing to supply more. Okay, take a look here. If you can't see this, if you're in the back, pull it up on your screen. So the more that you supply, the higher the price that you want out of that, or the higher the price people are willing to pay, the more you're willing to supply. But that's a change in quantity supplied because of the fact that you are moving along the same curve. There's no other factors. There's not a new supply curve. This is not a supply curve in case you were curious about that. That's just telling us it's a change in quantity supplied. When we move along that curve and pick any one of these points here, we could go here from, I think that's about 50 cents. You're willing to supply 1,000 candy bars. If we were to increase the price up to 70 cents, you're willing to produce 3,500. If we increase the price to $1.25, you're willing to produce just under 5,000. And if we increase increase the price per candy bar to $1.60, you're willing to produce 5,000. Okay? So we have questions on change in quantity supplied before we move on to change in supply. See the pattern between demand and supply so far? Kind of goes very similar here. It's going to sound great on the video. Here, let me go back through that. Here we go.